Okay. I'd like to thank everyone for coming. It's really lovely to see an amazing turnout. And it's great to be here in Tel Aviv. One day you guys will all come to Jerusalem again. And we might even go to Beersheba. I was just speaking to one of the ROIs from 2008, Shlomi, and he lives in Beersheba. So if he can come all the way here, we can go all the way there. It's very exciting to be here with Steve. Steve Yastrow is very familiar with ROI. We've worked with Steve since 2010, when we did some consulting with him about branding, and you know how great we are at branding now. So that was with a lot of thanks to Steve. And we did a masterclass also about 2 years ago. And it was about, at that time we did one about branding. This one is Ditch the Pitch, which is all about persuasion, which most of you are really, really good at. So I don't know why you're going to get even better at it. So we're excited to listen to Steve tonight. And he's actually even brought in a special guest, Yossi, who's sitting to my left, your right. And Steve will introduce Yossi a little bit more. So it's really wonderful. We're glad that you're here. After we finish the evening, you're all welcome to follow us for drinks. The night will go on. And thank you very much.
Great, thanks so much. Evening, guys. How are you all? So glad you're here. And thanks to ROI for organizing tonight. We've got Alyssa and Noah from ROI and Marcus. Renana Barchen are all here. Thanks, guys. How many of you are members of the ROI community? I think virtually most everybody, probably about 75%. Great. Wonderful. So glad you're here. So eager to do this. Tonight we're going to talk about how to persuade people, how to sell to people in ways that you might not normally think of. Okay? My name's Steve Yastrow. I've written 3 books, and basically let me just give you a quick overview of what my thing's all about. I'm basically about how do you communicate your story to your customers or anyone else you need to persuade in a way that they're really going to hear it. My first book's called Brand Harmony, and Brand Harmony says if you just throw advertisements or mail out at people, they're not necessarily going to believe your story. What makes customers understand what you're all about is how every experience they have with you blends in harmony to tell one story. And this book, We, was about how do you communicate with people so they believe they have a relationship with you. What we're going to talk about tonight is my new book, Ditch the Pitch, which talks about how to get people to understand how you can help them, how to persuade people to want to be involved with you without delivering a sales pitch. A sales pitch meaning without just explaining your story, but getting into a conversation with people. Now, I had planned to have plenty of copies of Ditch the Pitch here tonight for anybody who wanted it. I sent a box from the United States. I live in Chicago. Does anybody want to guess where the box ended up? And I'll give you a hint. It's not Israel. Anybody have a guess where the books ended up?
Iran, Eastern Europe.
No, close. Anybody? What's that? Iran. Sochi, yeah. And they got stuck in security at Sochi, right? I'll tell you what. Well, my brother Phil is here tonight. Phil, why don't you say the name of the country backwards? They ended up. Okay, Lizarb. Can anybody do Lizarb back? Brazil. The books ended up in Brazil. That was pretty good. The books ended up in Brazil, so they will be forwarded here. If anybody wants one, you can get it later, and I'll cover the shipping. You go to Brazil. Okay, so great. So let's get started. As Alyssa mentioned, I have a special guest with me tonight, Yossi Fine. Maybe you know Yossi? Yeah. I know Yossi. Yossi, for many of you know, Yossi is a music producer, musician, and life coach based here in Israel. He's worked with a lot of artists in Israel. He's produced Hadag Nachash, virtually all their records. Worked a lot with Idan Reichel, many other people. His band was the Eccentric Sound System. And the reason Yossi's here is this concept, Ditch the Pitch, is about improvising, about being able to go into a conversation with a customer and get rid of your sales pitch. Be willing to see what's going on with this customer and improvise the right course. So in writing Ditch the Pitch, I interviewed many actors who improvise on stage and also many musicians who improvise. And so Yossi and I had met about a year and a half ago at a music festival in Oregon, and we really had some great connections on this whole idea about how you improvise both in your life, well, not just both, in many places, in your life, in your music, and in your relationships with customers and anybody else you have relationships with. So what Yossi and I are going to do tonight in this workshop is bring in some music as a metaphor for what you can do for your customers. And we're going to improvise a bunch and see how it goes, right? Yeah. Excellent, excellent. So let's get started. Does everybody have their books here? Workbook? Everybody have these? Yeah. Sorry, mine, remember the teacher used to have the bigger book with extra things in it? So mine's got so it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Let's open up, if we can, to page 2. Anybody need one? We have a few more. So, if I use some idioms, for those of you who aren't native English speakers, just stop me. But the first thing I want to make sure we all understand is what the concept of a sales pitch is. A pitch is when you throw something, right? A baseball pitcher throws a ball. In a water pitcher, the water comes out of the pitcher. It's going one way. So a sales pitch is when you want to sell something to somebody and they just talk at you. Hey, you want to buy this pencil? Let me tell you why you should buy this pencil. It's a really good pencil. They're very sturdy. I can give you 12 for $1, right? I'm pitching. I'm just talking to you. What do you feel like when somebody gives you a sales pitch? What's that?
No, thank you.
I'm sorry?
You shut down.
You shut down. What else did I hear over here?
Yeah, it was no, thank you.
No, thank you. I don't want it. Right. We get defensive. We get defensive. I remember once when my brother Phil was trying to make a big decision about buying something. He had lots of options. And what he said to me was, he said, I finally figured out how to make this decision, at least to filter some things out. Everything I'm hearing either is or isn't a sales pitch. What do you think Phil avoided? The sales pitches, right? When we feel somebody is pitching at us, we get very defensive. What that means is if you want to encourage your customers or anyone else you need to persuade, maybe it's not a customer, maybe it's somebody you work with, maybe it's your spouse, who knows? You can't just use a sales pitch because people shut down. They say no thank you. They don't want to be interested. What do we replace sales pitches with? We replace them with persuasive conversations. In other words, don't pitch, have a conversation. Have a conversation that matters to your customer. Your pitch is about you. Have a conversation about your customer. Why is this important? Well, who do your customers care about more? You or them? Anybody voting for you? Right, of course. Our customers care about themselves more than us. So instead of having a pitch about what we care about, have a conversation about what our customers care about. So looking at page 3, let's think about this for a second. Who do you need to persuade in the course of a month? Think about it for a moment. Who do you need to persuade? What's that?
Everybody.
Almost everybody. Who could that include, Shlomi?
My mother, my sister, my wife.
Your wife, right?
My boss.
Your boss? You know, you talk about, so in your personal life, you need to persuade not just customers, you need to persuade your boss. Those of you who have employees reporting to you, you need to persuade them. People who work in another department in an organization, you need to persuade them. If you're an entrepreneur, you're trying to raise money, whereas Gal, you were talking about just being on a fundraising trip, Ariel, right? But trying to raise money, you have to persuade people. In all those cases, you need to ditch the pitch. Who else wants to tell me who else you need to persuade over the course of a month? What's that?
Potential partners.
Potential partners, somebody you want to work with, right? Why would I want to work with you, right, Bar? Thank you.
Yourself.
Yourself, okay, good. Costa says you need to persuade yourself. Do you think you'd buy your own sales pitch if you said it in the mirror? Okay, good. Anybody else? Who else do you need to persuade? Here's what I want you to think about. In every persuasive situation, in every situation where you need to persuade somebody to do something, whether it's to buy from you, to pay you, to invest in your company, to collaborate with you, to do anything you want them to do. In all of those cases, you can use the tools that we're going to discuss tonight. I'm going to give you some very concrete tools about how you can ditch the pitch. But if you think about it, if you're going to ditch the pitch, in other words, if you have been used to writing a PowerPoint presentation before you go into a customer conversation, then you go in and show them the PowerPoint. Or if you've been used to rehearsing exactly what you want to say when you go into a meeting with a customer, I'm telling you, don't do that. Don't bring it in. So what are you going to do if you're not going to have a pre-written pitch? What you need to do then is you need to improvise. So let's flip over to the next page if we can, on page 5. Now, many of you may think that, hey, I'm not good at improvising, you might say. I don't know, maybe you do, maybe you don't. But if any of you are thinking, I'm scared to improvise, let me set up this section with a very, I think, fundamental truth about what it means to be human. Human beings were born to improvise. You've never had 2 days in your whole life that are the same. You've never even had 2 hours, or probably even 2 5-minute periods that are exactly the same. We evolved to live in a world that is always changing, that is always unpredictable. You don't know what's going to exactly happen every day when you wake up. So therefore, the human beings that survived to become us were those that could navigate an unpredictable world and improvise every day. Human beings were born to improvise. And as I mentioned, when I met Yossi Fine a year and a half ago, we really hit it off talking about improvisation. So Yossi, you want to come up for a minute? We'll just talk a little bit about improvisation. So for our recording, would you mind holding this? Great. You can say hi to everybody if you'd like.
Hello.
Yeah. I know Mira and Yossi immediately saw each other because Mira's a singer. They knew each other right away. Yeah, and it's okay. So we were at a music festival in Oregon, and Yossi was producing a band there. And my brother Phil and I were there hearing music. We're bands on like 4 stages. It was great fun. And within 5 minutes of meeting, we were talking about improvisation and how it's so important to both of our musical lives, but just important in terms of life. So Yossi, when you think about what it means to improvise, what does it mean to you to improvise?
Improvise, I remember what I told you is that the way I improvise a lot of times, I'll talk about what I do in music, but it's the same thing. It's a human communication. It's not necessarily just musical. I listen. If somebody plays something, I never met them before, or they have an idea, I let them play first, which means they'll talk first. And they talk, and all of a sudden, I go for one sentence that they said, and I'll just start digging into that particular sentence and make it bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, musically, and build everything around that one sentence that I could relate to also. I can understand that I could do something with that. It hits me, and I can relate to it, and so therefore it becomes organic for something that I can relate to. Because if I'm going to persuade someone, I have to believe in it first. I cannot persuade anybody to do something that I do not believe in. So first of all, I have to relate to something that they say. So I search. I listen, I search, and then all of a sudden, it might be the name of the place where they come from, and I've been there. Or it might be something that they do or they love to do. I just ask, what is it that you love to do? And people start telling what they love to do. And I look, if I can relate to something, I'll make it bigger. And I'll start talking about it.
That's great. You know, one of the, Yossi and I were talking about a story yesterday when we were together. And if you know what a musical arranger is, everybody know what a musical arranger is? It's a person who writes out, who creates all the parts for the different instruments to play. When I think of a musical arranger, I think of somebody sitting and writing all the parts. Well, Yossi won an award from ICUM, which is the music, what is like?
The
Music publishing.
Yeah.
It was 2006, he won an award here in Israel for Arranger of the Year, but none of the parts were written out. They were all improvised. And this was for the Hadag Nachash record, Ezrat Hajam. Can you talk a little bit about how you improvised, how the whole band improvised so much of that record?
Yes. Okay, so we put 2 records out. Does anybody know the Dag Nachash? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
By the way, great concert in Jerusalem last night, and Yossi played with the band last night. So it was great.
So that's a technique that I kind of learned from one of the greatest arrangers of the last century named Gil Evans, which I played with. And I saw the way he does stuff, and I imported it into the Dag Nachash. What it was, we made 2 albums, and the 2 albums that we did prior to that became the most successful albums of the year in Israel. They became #1, and then the next one also became #1, and a lot of #1 songs. And I thought, what if we're gonna continue to do the same way that we did it before, which was planned, we're not gonna succeed, because people are not gonna want the same over and over. So we have to do something completely different for number 3. Okay? So first of all, I realized that that's going to be the thing. And I decided that we're not going to record it in Israel. We're going to record it in California, in a place where they could all improvise all the time at one time. It will be a very big studio with a lot of different instruments that they could always get into, and we could always record it. There will be no songs written prior to us coming to the studio. There will be no songs, no lyrics, no music, no arrangements, nothing. We're just going to come and make it happen. And I had to persuade the record label, that puts all the money for it. And
He ditched the pitch, by the way.
yes, and I just believed in it, and I was like, look, if we're gonna we did number 1 and 2, and it went great. Let's do the opposite now. Let's do something different. Let's celebrate the fact that we are so successful. That was persuading, and he was like, okay, here's the money for it, and so we got there. So I had instructions for the musicians of how to do it, and the deal was like this. We start playing. Everybody start playing, and we're listening to each other. And first of all, we get into a certain beat or tempo, whatever happens, okay? And then at a certain point, if somebody has a specific idea, musical idea, just start repeating it over and over again. And everybody listen to it and go with him. Go with this one idea and make it bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until this idea gets to be developed. And then once it's developed to a certain point, maybe somebody else has another idea, and then he starts to lead. So he starts to repeat over and over and over again until the next guy next to him starts to repeat with him, and then the whole group starts to follow this guy, the next guy. And so that was constantly the way the sessions went. I was listening to them all in headphones, and they were listening in headphones, and all of a sudden I would listen to someone does something really cool. I was like, yes, you keep doing this, and the next guy, listen to him, and do whatever you want to do, but listen to him. And constantly we made it bigger and bigger. I'll make the long story short. It was a lot of hours that we recorded. It was a lot of ideas that was going on. And I had to come back here and create a record out of it. I left a lot of the stuff exactly the way it was. In the end of it, I got the Arranger of the Year award in Israel for doing it, and I did not write one note. I did not plan one note, and a lot of times when I would open the tracks on the computer, I was like, oh my God, this is so great. I did not know I'm gonna get the award, but I thought, this could have not been happening if somebody had planned it. So a lot of times with this particular mindset, I go into many different situations. Not always, but a lot of times. The only thing I have in mind is the outcome. I want it to be, I know that I want it to be great. But what's going to happen from here to there, I'm not sure. And it's like a GPS. If we're going to go, let's say, to Jerusalem, there is many ways to go to Jerusalem. If we're going to just go from Route 1 and go straight there, that's okay. We're going to get there fast, but it might be boring, and we might not learn a lot of things. But there's many ways to get to Jerusalem. And so as long as I know where I'm going to go, I'm going to get there. I know the outcome, but I leave a lot of the details open.
Excellent. And what we're going to do tonight is learn how to take the kind of magic that Yossi took into the studio to have Bezrat Hajam be such an amazing record, and talk about how to use those same principles in your business and in your work life to persuade people more effectively. But since we're setting up improvisation as a theme tonight, should we improvise a little for everybody?
Let's go.
Okay, let's do it. We're not sure exactly what we're going to do because,
Yeah, you're gonna start. I'm gonna follow you.
yeah. For knowing each other for a year and a half, we had the first chance to play music for the first time together yesterday. Okay, now one of the things I mentioned is that I met Yossi a year and a half ago in the United States, and then I've been in Israel a couple times since. We've gotten together. We had a chance to finally play music together. What an honor for me yesterday. And we played about 2 hours in Yossi's studio at his house in Herzliya. Now, we started playing. We didn't start talking. We just started playing. There's a lesson in that that is a big theme for tonight. How were Yossi and I able to start improvising together when we'd never played music together before? It's because we weren't winging it. You know that term in English? Winging it means you just make it up as you go along. Yes, we were improvising, but we share some fundamentals about music, right? We both understand certain musical idioms and musical structures. Plus, we have habits we've developed over the years, him I'm sure much better than me, about how to listen to somebody else and react to it. That translates perfectly to our situation tonight. How do you improvise a situation with a customer when it's unpredictable and you know what's going to happen? In the same way we were able to create music together, having never played before. To do that, there's a very important word I want to talk about. The word is a habit. What is a habit?
It's a behavior that you do over and over again.
Right, a behavior you do over and over again. Anybody else want to tell me another word to describe a habit?
You're used to do it every
You're used to it. You do it, yeah, you don't have to think about it, do you? Yeah, you do it over and over again. As Denise says, you're used to doing it. So if you flip now to page 5, you'll see the 6 ditch the pitch habits. And just like I mentioned, there are habits that help musicians improvise or habits that help actors improvise. I'm going to teach you 6 habits that when you use these habits, you will be able to create the right conversation with each individual customer at the moment you're with that customer. These 6 Ditch the Pitch habits are the heart of my book, Ditch the Pitch, which is somewhere in Brazil, right? Somewhere else. And so what we're going to do tonight is go through those habits, probably in about the next hour. Then we'll have time to talk about those, and Yossi and I will give you some other musical metaphors to help us understand that. You'll see the habits here. I'm not going to go over them in detail at this moment. I will as we go through them. But you'll see there are 6 habits, and they fall into 3 categories. The first category is about figuring out what's going on. The second category, habits 3 and 4, is called go with the flow. And habits 5 and 6 are about letting a shared story emerge. Okay, don't worry about understanding that exactly, but you get an idea of where we're going. Okay? Let's now flip, if we can, to page 6. And let's look at the first 2 habits that are about figuring out what's going on. Here's something I want you to recognize every time you meet with a customer. And again, by customer, it might be somebody who buys from you. It might be a colleague you want to persuade. Let's use that term customer broadly, okay? Anyone that you need to persuade to do something is a customer. When you meet with a customer, recognize that you do not know what's going on. Now, that's easy to understand if it's a new customer, right? If I just met Costa today and I want to sell him something, I don't know who he is or what he wants. I've got to figure out things about him. But even with a customer that you have met with many, many times, you don't know what's going on with them today. I had a customer in Chicago. They're a real estate company. They're responsible for leasing retail space, stores in office buildings, on the ground floor of office buildings. They had one client, a big building with many stores. They meet with them every Tuesday afternoon. They have 10 emails a day going back and forth, and phone calls many times a day too. But when they go to this every Tuesday meeting, they talk to these people all the time. I said, when you go to the Tuesday meeting, what do you learn about in the first minute or 2 of the conversation? Oh, we learn what kind of a mood our customer's in. We learn about a new budget cut. We learn about something else their bosses said. In other words, even though they meet with these customers once a week in person and talk on the phone and have emails all the time, they don't know what's going on when they meet with a customer. You have to figure out what's going on. So let's talk about how you learn what's happening with a customer with these first 2 habits. They're about listening, observing, and seeing what's happening. Ditch the pitch habit number 1, which is on page 6, is called think input before output. Input before output. Input, the information coming into your eyes and into your ears, before the output, the words coming out of your mouth. Whatever you say needs to be informed and influenced by what you see and what you hear with your customer. So let's think about this for a second. I have a box here, and I want you to write for a minute in the box. It says, what can you learn in the first minute of a customer conversation? Take a minute and write down, what can you learn in the first minute of a customer conversation? If anybody needs a pen or a pencil, Alyssa's passing those out here. Let's bring these over here. I'll take some. You got some? Yeah. Good. What can you learn in the first minute when you talk to one of your customers? This could be a new customer or somebody you know really well.
Anyone else need a pen?
Okay, give me some ideas. If you're still writing, it's okay. You can keep just writing as you're listening to everybody else talk. Maybe it'll give you some inspiration. Who wants to tell me something you can learn about a customer in the first minute?
If they're in a hurry.
If they're in a hurry, right? Because if somebody's in a hurry, you don't want to tell them too much. Great point. What else can you learn? Yes?
What do they want to talk about?
What do they want to talk about? What interests them? Great point. What else can you learn? Yes?
Who showed up to the meeting?
What?
Who showed up?
Who showed up to the meeting? You
The
mean?
senior person or junior
Right,
person?
right. What is their title? What is their position in the company? Great point. Great point.
Hobbies.
What's that?
Hobbies.
Their hobbies. What are they interested in, right? You ever gone into somebody's office and you see pictures that tell them that they like to ski or sail a boat or whatever? Play music. Noah?
Personal anecdotes that you could then use to weave into your
Great point. A personal anecdote. They might tell you something. Oh,
family.
yeah, I just got back from vacation with my family or something.
How
Yes.
important the meeting for the customer?
What's that?
How important?
Oh, how important is the meeting for them? Are they really interested in this or not? Amazing what you're doing. Gal, would you say something?
What kind of conversation do they carry? Are they abrasive? Are they kind and taking their time?
Yeah, what's their conversational style? Right. Are they brusque and hard? Or are they more? That's a great point. Think of all the things you can learn. Now think about all these things we said. Are they in a hurry? You know, how interested are they in the conversation? What's their position in the company? What's their conversational style? Won't that affect how you converse with them? Imagine if you'd written a sales pitch and showed up and said, okay, let me tell you about my company, right? You don't know who they are. So thinking input before output is incredibly important. Now, in Ditch the Pitch, in the book, I mentioned there's 6 habits. Each habit has 3 practices, okay? And you can see, I'll give you some information on my website, so because the books aren't here, you can see a bunch of videos and other information on my website. I'll write that up on the board in a few minutes. I chose some of the practices here because obviously we don't have time for all of them. But the one practice I put here is at the bottom of the page. It's called Say Less to Notice More. So if you practice this, you'll learn to do think input before output. What do you think this means, say less to notice more?
Don't interfere with the flow of output of your customers.
Great point. What's your name?
Leo.
What's that?
Leo.
Leo said, wonderful point. If you talk, you might interrupt the flow of what they want to say. Great. What else does it mean to say less to notice more? What's that? Ask questions and then be quiet and let them talk and listen. Think about it. Anytime you're talking, you can't be learning things about your customer. Yes, you might see their body language, but whenever you're talking, you can't understand what's happening with them. I'm going to encourage you to experiment with this. In conversations with customers, see how little you can talk. It's amazing how much more they will talk and how much more you will learn. Also, I referenced a book in Ditch the Pitch that I read, and I met the people who wrote it. It's a couple who are professors of communications. And their book is called Be Quiet, Be Heard, meaning when you're quiet, people hear you more. It's interesting. But one of the things they said in that book is research shows that the person who talks 51% or more in a conversation enjoys it the most. In other words, if you let your customer talk more, not only will you learn things about them, they will enjoy the conversation. And don't you want your customer to enjoy the conversation with you? So think input before output, say less to notice more. Any comments on that, on this whole idea of input before output, listening and observing before you talk?
That way you let them feel it's about them and not about you.
Great point, Ariel. It's about them, not about you. And we're going to return to that theme in a while because, as I asked earlier, who does your customer care about more, you or themselves? They care about themselves. So have them feel the conversation's about them. Great. We'll bring that point back later. That's very good. So the first habit, I'm sorry, go on. Uri?
I just want to say that a lot of times they find you more interesting when you speak less.
They definitely find you more interesting when you speak less, no doubt, because they feel they're being listened to, right? And when people talk too much, their words often get in the way of their message. The next habit goes hand in hand. Yes, please.
What happens if they're eager to hear you?
Well, there's no doubt they're eager to hear you. People say, well, tell me about your business. The trick is don't always take the bait and talk too much. Make sure that when you're telling them about your business, it's a conversation. And I'm going to talk a lot about that tonight. I'm going to introduce a tool in a while that my brother Phil made up. It's called the 1 paragraph rule. I mean, never talk more than 1 paragraph's worth of information at a time. Thanks, Phil. I've used it a lot.
Yeah, if you say more than a paragraph and they don't respond, shut up.
Just shut up. Exactly. Give them a break. And so if somebody asks to tell about you, talk about a paragraph's worth of information and stop. See if they're interested or if they ask a question. So we'll talk a lot about that point, Ariel, as we go forward. Now, the second habit that goes along with this, these are both figure out what's going on. We have think input before output is habit number 1. Habit number 2 is called size up the scene. Here's how to understand this habit. Let's imagine you're going to the movies. The movie starts at 7:30. You plan to leave your house at 7, but you're late leaving, and then you can't find your car keys or your wallet, and you get out of the house late, and there's traffic, and you get to the movie, and it's already been on for 15 minutes. You come into a movie 15 minutes late. You sit down. What are you doing when you walk into a movie that's late and you're late? Trying to figure it out. What?
To be quiet.
You're quiet and you're trying to figure it out and you're watching, right?
You don't go in.
Yeah, right, don't go in. But let's imagine you do. Because here's the situation. When you turn on a TV show in the middle or you go into a movie in the middle, you're trying to figure out what's going on. This is exactly what happens in every single conversation you have with another human being. You have never had a deep conversation with anyone the moment they were born. What I mean by that is every conversation you have with somebody, you are going into the middle of their life story, just like walking into the middle of a movie or turning on a TV show in the middle. So whenever you sit down with a person, you need to figure out what's going on in their life at this moment. So here's a couple of tips to help you size up the scene. Size up the scene, meaning figure out what's going on in this story, just like you size up the scene in a movie. In the middle of page 7, I have a tip to help you size up the scene. It's called Who Comes Before What? Now, we heard over here, what was your name? I'm sorry? Shai mentioned what's their position in the company. Gal mentioned what's their conversational style. Bar mentioned what their hobbies are. Here's the point. The first thing you want to learn about somebody is who they are as a human being. Before you think about, what do they want to buy or what do I want to sell them, focus on who they are. Because once you understand who they are as a person, it's that much easier to determine how to persuade them to do something. Always focus on who before what. I mentioned that, I'm sorry, go on.
Isn't this the opposite of what you were saying earlier about improvising? Because you're making assumptions that might be false instead of just being yourself and going with that.
Go on, explain what you mean, Kaylee.
Well, you're almost thinking too hard, and you can make false assumptions because you're doing this all in 1 minute.
No, what you're doing, first of all, it isn't just in 1 minute. I gave you the example of how much you can learn in a minute just to show you how much you can learn in a minute. But you are always in input before output mode. If a conversation with a customer lasts an hour or a full day, I was with one of my customers for 3 hours today, wasn't I, Noah? You're constantly in input mode. You're constantly listening. You're constantly observing. It's not just for 1 minute. And the point is, what you want to do is continually be open to things happening. Like when Yossi and I were playing there, at one point, I could see he wanted to go somewhere else because I was open to listening, and so we went to a new place. Just like with a customer, you're totally open to go somewhere different. You don't want to think about it too much. You just want to be open and flexible. So you focus first on who the person is, and then you're able to determine what kind of things you'd like to discuss with them. So the first practice I talk about is called Know Who You Are With. Focus on who the person is. I live in Chicago, which is the world capital of improvisation on a stage, of actors improvising. Have you heard of Second City before? A lot of the Saturday Night Live actors came from there. And so I interviewed a lot of those people about how they do it. And it's interesting. They told me about when 2 actors come on a stage and they want to make up a scene, and they haven't decided what the scene's about. They're just totally going to see where it goes. The first thing they want to figure out is who's this other person. In other words, if Mira and I were on a stage together, I don't know if she's going to play my mother, my daughter, a guy I know, right? I don't know. So the first thing I want to figure out is who is she? What character does she want to play? I saw an improvisation scene at Second City once, and all of a sudden there was a man on this side of the stage and a woman over here. They could have been any 2 human beings or any kind of relationship imaginable. The first thing the woman said was, to start the scene, she said, "Let's have a talk, mother-in-law to son-in-law." So all of a sudden it went from every possible combination of people to a mother-in-law and her son-in-law. Now they could start a story. Same thing with your customer. Figure out who this person is, and then you can go take the conversation to another level. Another technique they teach in stage improvisation is called listen for the game. What it means when you start a conversation, you try to figure out, hey, what's the game we're playing now? What's happening? Same thing happens with your customers. You get into a conversation with a customer. What's your name? You got your name tag covered up.
Giordana.
Oh, Giordana. Sorry, it's the third time I had to ask you your name, Giordana. Like Giordana said, is the person in a hurry? Okay, maybe we're going to have a fast conversation. Is the person very curious? Okay, maybe we're going to have a deeper conversation that moves a little slower. Is the person have a good sense of humor? We're going to have a funny conversation. When you get into a conversation with people, you find a rhythm. You find a vibe. Now, I also do a lot of music improvisation with my 25-year-old son is a very good drummer. And we'll improvise together. And I'll notice what will happen is we'll play and we'll kind of find a little rhythm and we'll play off it. I think it's a great musical metaphor for this. When you're with your customer, how do you find that game? How do you find that, that little sort of that situation that feels good together? I think Yossi and I could demonstrate that too. Why don't we demonstrate kind of locking in and finding a game? And what I'm going to do is, since this is about figuring out what's going on, I'm going to let Yossi lead me. And I mentioned thinking input before output's all about listening. And then we're going to try to lock into some sort of game. So I'm going to follow you. And you can, I'll try to like do input before output and listen for the game.
Okay. Let's make it like very simple.
Oh, very simple. Okay, good.
Which is neuro-linguistic programming. What we do, if we want to have a conversation with anybody that we know or don't know, we start emulating a little bit of how they talk, what they talk about, and we start repeating that to them. And that's called pacing. We pace the way they do things, the way they talk, what they talk about. And after we pace, we start to read. And so what happened here was, first of all, it was a rhythm. All right? So he's pacing me. All right? And we stay there for a minute with luck. And then I start to lead.
What's so interesting about that is that oftentimes we listen at these big levels, but just it's trying to follow the speed. When Yossi went to speed up and slow down, means you got to be listening at a very high level of detail. And think about when you're with your customers, not listening at the big level of sentences and minutes, but being down to the granular level of seconds and their slightest nuances of their speech. So you can hear the details of what they're saying and react to it. If I wasn't listening at a high level of detail, I would have never been able to speed up and slow down with you.
Yeah.
Just totally locked into the speed there.
Exactly. So a lot of times if you go to a customer and they speak high energy, very abrasive, yes, what is it? What do you want? Or on the phone, hello? Usually I'll go, yes. They go, yes, who is it? I'm like, My name is Yossi. And what do you want? And I'm like, I want to have this and that. Okay, and what else? And then I might just slow down and talk like this, and then the way they're going to respond is going to be according to me. Because it was pace, 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 lead. It's 3 times, and then on the 4th time, you lead. If that doesn't happen, you need to start all over again. But there's a whole technique, you can study NLP, but that's the way it is. So a lot of times you can practice it anywhere, everywhere that you might go, just by talking to people and kind of like answer in the way they're speaking. If they're speaking in low manner, speak in low manner, and then take them higher. If they speak in a high energy, talk to them back in high energy, and then after a while see what happens if you take it lower. It's great practice, it's a lot of fun.
Great, it's a great segue to our next habits. Thanks, Yossi. And in fact, Yossi's going to lead us in a little session on that in a minute. So we've talked about input before output and sizing up the scene. And you can see that I mentioned sizing up the scene is finding the game. And once I was able to find the game with Yossi, and yes, we purposely kept that simple just to show you that you find what's the thing that's happening here. What's the game we're playing together? Then you can create a conversation. One thing we spent a lot of time talking about yesterday is before you can really take a conversation somewhere, you have to lock in together. Once you're in sync with each other, then you can take a conversation to another place. So let's turn, if we can, to pages 8 and 9 and get into our second level of conversations, which is a level of habits, which is called go with the flow. Okay, yes?
I just wanted to ask you about the input when you're talking to an audience.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have the one-on-one level. What kind of things are you looking out for?
It's a really good point. So like let's say right now, because my job right now is to bring information to you, but I would like to make it as much of a conversation as possible. So one of the things is to get input from the audience whenever you can, okay? And if I go too long, throw something at me, okay? In other words, by asking people for information, because you want to not only have them feel truly like they're participating, but learn who they are too, right? We've already gotten some nice input from the crowd here, and I can tell that people are thinking. I can hear how well you're absorbing the information. And I think that makes a big difference. You got to read the crowd. Okay, so let's talk about what it means to go with the flow. A conversation with somebody is a very fragile thing. If you're in a conversation with somebody and you want that conversation to stop, there are a million things you can do. What can you do if you want to sabotage a conversation and make it go bad?
Look at your cell phone.
Great. Has that ever happened to anybody in this room? You're talking to somebody, look at your cell phone. What else can you do if you want to make a conversation go? Look the other way. Or don't answer them. Say what you want to say. Or start talking too much. Here's the point. To create a strong dialogue, a rich conversation, both people in the conversation, or maybe it's more than 2 people, but let's imagine 2 people, they both need to agree to keep this conversation going. I like to think that a conversation really is a series of yeses, where you're continually agreeing with each other to keep the conversation going.
Building on one another.
Great, building on one another. What else are you doing in a great dialogue? You're building on one another. What else are you doing?
Get another ROIer, Molly Livingston, who's an improvisation guide.
Yeah?
So one of her things is she says when you're listening to somebody, you should always continue with yes and. And if you want to break the conversation, you're going to say no. You're listening to them and say no, but.
Totally perfect. Is Noah mentioned that? It's great. Yes, and. It's one of the practices here. Let's talk about. That's great. No, it's great. Wonderful. You're there. What does it mean? Let's pick up on what Noah just said. When you're in a conversation, what do you think it means to practice yes and? Anybody want to tell us?
It's when you object to what he's saying to you, but you don't want to offend him, perhaps, and you say yes, but...
Well, that's a really interesting point that Lena's making. So let's talk about what yes and is, then I'll come right back to your point in a second. It's an excellent point. Which is that what yes and means is that when you're in a conversation, you want to find a way to agree with the person and then build upon it. I mentioned stage improvisation actors who walk on a stage with no script, no pre-written script, and they improvise. Or when Yossi was in the studio with the story he told, making Ezrat Hajam, how they were able to create something. What you're constantly doing is whatever the other person offers you, you take it and say yes, and then you build upon it. So what stage actors do when they go on stage, I mentioned the scene with mother-in-law and son-in-law. This guy didn't say, no, I'm not your son-in-law. He said, yes, and then said something back to her that built on that, and pretty soon the story builds. You want to constantly be saying yes, and. Now, yes, but feels different than yes, and, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What does it feel like? I mean, yes, but is really a way of saying no.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to do. And this got to what Lena said before, is sometimes it's hard to agree with somebody. I remember once a company asked me for a proposal for a consulting engagement. And we talked about the project, and I gave them a proposal with a price. They said, this is great, Steve, but can you lower the price? Now, I wasn't going to lower the price, but I know that the word no is a bad word. So instead of saying, no, I can't lower the price, I said, yes, I understand this is a big investment for your company, and I think it's a great investment for your company. If it's not within your budget, maybe what we can do is take some things out of the project and make it a smaller project. So I never said no. I agreed with the fact that it was, I actually said, a good investment for their company. Notice that, not a good expense. But I said, and we can figure out how to make another project. It's very important to recognize that you can always find something to say yes to. This is written on the page there. Always think of a way that you can find something to agree with. Maybe you agree with their concern. Maybe you agree with a next step they want to take to figure out the disagreement you have. But the word no is like a red light at a stoplight. And you want to be careful not to throw your conversation off track. Yes,
Does
you're
it
done?
apply also to the consumer? Like, do we need to ask questions so in order that he says yes? Like, is it us say yes or also them?
Oh, it's a great point. You want your customer to say yes too, because once your customer says no, they feel like the conversation stopped. So one of the things you want to make sure you do is don't offer solutions too early to your customer. So for example, let's say a customer is talking and you think you've got it figured out. You say, oh, I see, so that means that this is the biggest problem in your business. And they say, well, no, it isn't. Now they've just said no and they feel like the conversation slowed down. Here's the point. In a conversation, you want to keep the flow going. You want to keep the rhythm going. You want to keep the pace of the conversation active. So I'm going to ask Yossi to do here is let's get the whole room into a flow together, okay? Can you lead us in a few minutes of just the whole room in a groove?
I'll do my best. I've never done this. Okay.
But you can improvise.
Yeah, let's improvise. Mira, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
You're gonna
Yes,
improvise.
and.
Great. So start a beat. Any beat that you would feel like doing it. I'm putting you on the spot, but that's great. We improvise. Okay, great. Keep it. Can you do that? And now improvise something vocally.
Vocally?
Yeah.
See da 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 da. See da to repeat that da da da. See da 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 da. See da 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 da.
More girls.
Da 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 da, come on, girl, do da. Ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 da. Da 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 da. Da 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 da, ba da da da, ba da da, ba da da da, ba 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 da da. Ba da da, ba-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da.
Awesome. Great, guys. You know, there's so many lessons in that kind of an experience. Yeah, thanks, Mira. Yeah, Mira and Yossi already know each other before tonight.
The deal was that I was afraid that I have to come up with something. So, thank you.
I mean, there's so many lessons in this because it's in a conversation with a customer, the pace, when you're talking, how fast the conversation is flowing is so important. When Yossi and I were talking yesterday about the joy of playing music, so much of it is that you get a chance to be in rhythm with other people all the time. You know that feeling, Mira? How great to have this whole room immediately in flow together, in the right rhythm and pace. And when Yossi sped us up, the room was great at speeding up together. Take that into your customer conversations. Make sure you're locked into a flow with your customer. It'll feel good to them. And once you're locked in, you can take the conversation to a higher level, which leads us to our next habit, which is called explore and heighten. Habit number 4. Explore and heighten. Before I talk about it, anybody want to guess what it means to explore and heighten in a conversation?
It's like what Yossi said. You find something that's important to the other person and
You build on it. Right, you build on it. Great. Explore, as I wrote in the middle of the page here, means to find out what your customer is interested in, and heighten is to talk about that. Think about it. When you're with somebody and they find something that you are interested in, and they ask about it and dig into it, doesn't it feel good? How much more interested will your customer be if you find something that's important to them and then explore it? So before I dig into that, let's put this in the context of our 4 habits so far. First habit was think input before output. I'm listening and I'm observing. And you keep doing that constantly. You're sizing up the scene, figuring out what's going on here. Who is this person? What do they really care about? In other words, you're using that input to figure out what's going on. Then you create a conversation, a series of yeses. You get in the flow, and as that's happening, you start to explore and heighten. You find out what your customer cares about, and you dig into it. You talk about that. So what does that mean to you? Anybody would give me an example? Can I hear an example from somebody about something that you learned that a customer really cares about when you were talking to them? Think of any situation with a customer of yours.
They want to know the communication channel, how we're going to support them.
How you're going to support them. So you find out they're really interested. So Phil and his colleagues here, they sell very complicated high-tech computer chips, customized integrated circuits. And so if they find out that one customer is really interested in how they're going to support them through the distribution channels, then Phil can talk about those kind of things. What might be something else you might learn that a customer cares about? Something different.
How sensitive they are to low power.
Okay.
You know, you listen and you
can go that direction. Or maybe it's a customer that's interested in price, right? Or maybe it's somebody who's really interested in the deadline.
Oh, well, the cute things are maybe other things.
They're always interested in price. And the trick is to take them to somewhere else. The point is, once you find out what your customer cares about, we go back to Bar's example before. Even if it's something not about business, it's about their hobbies, great, now I can talk about that. They're going to be more interested in that, in what I have to say. You always want to find out what the customer cares about and talk about it. That's how you take a conversation to a higher level. Imagine if you were the customer. Somebody finds out something you care about, and they start asking you more about it, and pretty soon the conversation becomes very rich about something that is important to you. Think about what that's going to would feel like. Now imagine what that feels like to your customer. Compare that to a sales pitch. A sales pitch where you come in and show them your PowerPoint slides or walk them through a script that you practiced in front of the mirror, compared to a conversation where you're exploring what they care about and then talking deeply about it. It's a completely different feel for your customer. Now, a couple of the points I have to discuss here at the bottom of page 8. Specify and elevate. What that means is that I've found that a great tool to explore and heighten is once you find the details, the specifics, that's why I said specify, elevate it to a higher level in their life or their business. Let me explain what I mean by that. So my company sells a lot of marketing consulting services. We help in business strategy consulting services. We help companies figure out who they are, who they want to be, what story they want to communicate to their customers. So if I'm talking to a CEO and he says, Steve, we'd like to talk to you about a brand strategy for our company, I know that he really doesn't want a brand strategy. He wants the effect of a brand strategy. He wants to have a more successful business. Maybe he wants to sell his company in a year and he feels it needs a better story. Maybe he feels he's losing sales to the competition, so he needs a better brand story. Maybe he feels like customers are only interested in price, so he wants a story that's about things other than price. So in other words, when I'm exploring and heightening with this person, I don't just talk about branding. I want to talk about the higher level issues in his or her business that branding would affect. So let's take an example from somebody else. Somebody want to volunteer, tell me about what their business is? Yeah, you're ready to talk, Gali. You can do it.
I just
You're launching an app.
I'm meeting with investors. We just launched a mobile app. It's a live social treasure map of the city. It's people sharing all their nooks and crannies and special, unique, unheard of places and live happenings. And my personal passion is really creating a social change in the way people approach, engage one another in the public domain. But when I go to someone to ask for money, I need to show them how I'm gonna make money out of it. So it's, if I'm gonna talk about this romantic, how people are gonna leave secret stuff for people to find, that's nice. That's not gonna give me an investment.
Well, this is an interesting point because let's use this because many people in this room, I'm sure, have thought about an idea you want to go raise money for. Okay, so let's use that as an example. Gal wants to raise money for an investor. So let's use this idea of elevating, taking it to a higher level. If somebody's going to invest in your business, it's not only because they think they can get a good return. Maybe there's a higher level that they want to balance their portfolio with something with a different risk level. Maybe that they feel that they have investors in their fund who are looking for social media type applications. Maybe they are looking to, maybe they have a long-term exit strategy in their fund and they have the patience to look for a business like yours. In other words, don't just talk about the return on investment on your company. Try to have a conversation about the greater reasons that they would want to invest in your company. Because then you'll find out what interests them, and you'll help be able to create a story that is going to be meaningful to what they care about.
Yeah, I think what I've learned so far is that that story that you're seeking for, that means something to them, is most likely not the story you are interested in. And if not most likely, then certainly not always the same story. You need to be very much in tune with that, and that's a huge challenge that I always
it's very challenging. I just wrote an article for Entrepreneur Magazine, their website, last week, and one of the main themes was, we just submitted to them a few days ago, and the theme was, your pitch is your reason somebody should invest. You got to find their reasons for investing. And you could translate that any time you're trying to persuade somebody. No matter what it is you're trying to sell or persuade, your pitch is about your reasons. You've got to use the techniques we're talking about tonight to find their reasons for wanting to buy or invest or do what it is you want them to do. Okay, any questions about going with the flow? These two habits about creating a series of yeses and exploring and heightening before I move on. Yes, Ira.
What if you have somebody that just you're not connecting with? You know, the conversation's going nowhere. It's like talking to dead air.
It's a great point. Let's first recognize that not everyone in the world should be your customer, right? We've all heard the term qualifying a customer. Who should you sell to and who should you not sell to? What's interesting is if you give a sales pitch, you might not realize that this person is not a good potential customer for you. When you're in a dialogue with them, you might learn, hey, you might learn quicker, this isn't a good relationship to pursue. So you can actually qualify your customer quicker when you're in dialogue, in a conversation versus pitching. Also, if there's dead air and they don't want to talk, maybe you can start to figure out what it is you're saying that's not interesting them and find another angle. Okay, any other questions on exploring and heightening? Yes, Liat?
Like in fundraising, for example, do you go to the point of, do you actually say I need money, or do you talk around it hoping that will, like it's always a sensitive issue of the balance.
Are you talking about for fundraising for investment or not-for-profits?
In this case, not-for-profit.
Okay, not-for-profit fundraising is a very interesting point. And by the way, for those of you who get eJewish Philanthropy as an email, I'm writing a series, a 7-part series there that's been every Monday. 4 of them have gone out so far of 7 on how to ditch the pitch in fundraising for your nonprofit. So, and if you go there and just go on eJewish Philanthropy and look at the tag, ditch the pitch, you can see the first 4 articles and watch for it the next 3 Mondays. And one of the things we talk about there is how it's the same thing as trying to raise money for an investor. If somebody's going to give money to your not-for-profit, you've got to find what they care about, right? I just spent, Ira and I just spent a week with about 50 people who are donors to the Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Chicago. And I guarantee you every one of those 50 guys has a different reason that they give money to that charity. So if they just have one reason, say you should give money because of this, you're going to miss it most of the time. But if you have a dialogue and find out what is it, this person may care about more care about Israel. This person may care about poor people in Chicago. This person might care about Jewish education. And when you find out what they care about, you can then structure your conversation to focus on what they care about. What organization is it that you work with? Yeah.
Well, this is an organization in Sierra Leone.
Okay.
But the money issue, do you talk about money?
Well, yes, but to get your question, you have to talk about money, no doubt. But the point is, in any persuasive conversation, you want to bring in money and price later in the conversation than people are normally used to. You want to engage your customer, get them interested in you, and then bring in the conversation about money. When we get to habits 5 and 6, which we're going to go to now, we'll be able to talk about when it is appropriate to start closing your sale. In fact, let's move on to those next 2 habits now. So we've talked about the first 2 habits. Think input before output and size of the scene. I put under the heading of figure out what's going on. Then the next 2 habits were under the heading of go with the flow. Create a series of yeses and explore and heighten. Now we're going to go to our last 2 habits, which are under the heading of let a shared story emerge. What I mean by a shared story is this. We already said that your customer cares more about themselves than about you, right? So if you just go in and give a sales pitch with your story, here's why you should invest in my company, here's why you should buy my integrated circuits, here's why you should invest in my charity, or whatever it is, you're not talking about what they care about. But you eventually need to have them see how you fit into their life. So we're going to talk about how to create a shared story where they see their story and your story connected together. Habit number 5 is called focus the conversation on your customer. Now I mentioned this a couple times already, that your customers care much more about themselves than about you, right? Now, because of that, let's think about how difficult it is for customers to believe that you are different. I mentioned that a lot of my work is in branding, and I wrote a book on branding, so I spent a lot of time thinking about how do you differentiate yourself in your customers' minds? How do you get your customers to think you're different? And what do most people do to try to get their customers to think they're different? They say, oh, we're better, we're faster, we're cheaper, we're bigger, whatever. We. They talk about my product, my product. The fact of the matter is it's very hard for your customer to believe that your product is better than somebody else's. Because customers have lots of choices, don't they? We live in a time in history where the people we're selling things to can buy them other places. And even if your service or your product or your charity or whatever it is unique, your customer may never give you credit for it being unique. They may not believe it. So if your customer doesn't think you're unique, but they think that they are the most special person in the world, don't your customers all think that they're unique? Here's what I think customers are saying. Does anybody want to volunteer to read where it says under the mantra of your customers? Alyssa, will you read that nice and loud?
Sure. If you want me to think you're different, show me that you know what makes me different.
If you want me to think you're different, Show me that you know what makes me different. Think about that. Your customers are saying that. Your customers are saying to you, if you want me to think you are different, show me that you know what makes me different. In other words, in a world where there is so much competition and where customers have so much choice, one of the best ways to have your customer think you are different is to honor what makes them different, to recognize what makes them unique. So let's talk about how to do that. And habit number 5 is called focus the conversation on your customer. As I mentioned earlier, because your customer cares about themselves so much more than they care about you, let's talk about what they care about. Let's talk about them. So the first practice I want you to think about is on page 10. It says, make 95% of the conversation about your customer. I don't mean you have to let your customer talk 95% of the time. You can talk more than that, but make sure that 95% of the subject matter of the conversation is about them. So in other words, when you go into a conversation with a customer, don't take the bait and tell your story too much. Make sure the conversation is about them. I had an interesting experience a couple of years ago. A CEO of a company came to a speech that I was giving, and he heard me speak, and he bought both my first 2 books, We and Brand Harmony, and he read them and he called me and said, Steve, I think you can help my company. Can you come meet with me and my management team? So the CEO and his management team. And they were in Chicago close to me. I said, great. We made a plan for me to come down for lunch. From 12:30 to 2, we'd meet in their conference room. And they brought lunch in. We all sit down at 12:30. It was the CEO, who already knew me, and 6 of his senior managers. And for the first 4 minutes, the CEO held up my books, and he said, I read Steve's books. I think Steve can really help us, and it was great. I loved it. It was wonderful to listen to. He was telling them how much I could help his company, and they're all eager to listen. They're all sitting there with their pencils, smiles, ready to listen. And after 4 minutes of introducing me, the CEO turns to me and says, so Steve, can you tell everybody about Yastrow and Company and how you can help us? Now, it was really tempting. After the CEO gave this great introduction and his team was all eager to listen, it was very tempting to say, okay, let me tell you about me. But instead, I restrained myself and said, thanks for asking about me, my company. Can I ask a favor? Can I hear more about your company first so I'll know what to tell you? The good news is, in the rest of the hour and a half, an hour and 26 minutes of the meeting, I never had to talk about Yastrow and Company. We talked about them the whole time, but they learned a lot about me. Think about that. If I never told them my story, how did they learn about me?
What you were interested
The way in which you answered the question.
The way I answered the question, I asked them questions about their business, and as opposed to saying, Yastrow and Company does this, 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 and this, I had a conversation about them and brought pieces of my story in at the right time. So for example, one of the things that they said in the middle of the conversation, they said, you know, we don't think we don't understand what our customers think about us. We don't understand what's going on in the minds of our customers. So that was the moment I said, well, maybe we could talk about doing some market research with your customers. If I had said, Yastrow and Company does market research, they would have not known what to do with that fact. But because we were having a conversation about the fact that they don't understand what their customers think, I could then take the market research piece and bring it into the story. You see what I'm saying? 95% of the conversation should be about your customer. If that happens, I guarantee you, you will find ways to bring pieces of your story into the conversation. Now, as you're doing this, you'll see right below that, on page 10, the technique that my brother Phil invented, as I told you about, the 1 paragraph rule. Phil, do you want to share how you came up with the 1 paragraph rule in your business?
Well, it's so easy to monologue, and you just cannot do that with these customers, or even in a relationship with your spouse.
You can't talk too much. You know, these guys sell a very complex technical product. It's high tech to the max. This is high tech of high tech. And it's very easy because it's so technical to start talking and talking and talking and talking because it's hard to explain. And Phil's observation was, even when he's speaking with an engineer, who understands the technical piece, if you start talking too much, they start thinking of other things. I mean, think about it. If somebody talks too long to you, what do you start doing? Oh, I need to call Joe back. Oh, I got to go to the grocery store tonight, right? You start thinking of other things. So what you want to do is talk about a paragraph's worth of information and then stop. What happens if you stop after talking a paragraphs of information, you wait? What might happen in that break? They might ask a question. What else might happen?
Awkward silence.
Awkward silence could happen. And maybe they'll fill it. A lot of times if you just stop, the customer will talk. What else might happen besides awkward silence or they ask a question?
They'll find something in what you said to connect.
They'll connect to something you said. Maybe you'll watch their body language. They'll go, or, right? You can read if they're interested. Are they following you? What if they look confused? Talk about a paragraph's worth of information and stop. And if the customer is silent and doesn't talk, then you can continue. But give them a chance to get into the conversation. So you can keep it a dialogue. As Phil said, you can't monologue. You must be dialoguing, because that's much more interesting to people. And it gives you information to take the conversation forward. So focus the conversation on your customer. Remember, because they care about you, they care about themselves more than they care about you, they really don't care about your story. Sorry to say it. They really don't care. They care about themselves much more. Have a conversation about the other person and bring pieces of your story in together. So let's talk about how to do that. On the facing page, we get to habit number 6, which is called Don't Rush the Story. Here's what happens to every one of you. I guarantee this also. You are all smart. You all know your businesses or your jobs. You, as we say in English, you know your stuff, right? You know your stuff. So I'm sure what happens when you start talking to a customer, in the first minutes, you're figuring out how you can help them. You're coming to conclusions about how to help this customer very quickly. I know, I sit down with any CEO and start talking about their business. I know in the first few minutes I'm going to have lots of ideas for what they need to do to make their company better. But what do you think would happen if in the first 3 minutes of a conversation I start telling the CEO all these solutions?
Overwhelming.
It's totally overwhelming. And it isn't just the first 3 minutes. It might be even after a couple of meetings. You will always have ideas for your customer before your customer is ready for those ideas. I guarantee it. You are smart. You will come up with solutions before the customer is ready for them. So therefore, you have to practice habit number 6, which is called Don't Rush the Story. Let the story come out at a pace the customer can accept. So let's talk about some practices to do that.
What if that's too slow? They're about to make a lot of mistakes on the way.
What's that?
What if it's too slow?
Give me an example.
The process they need to go through will take them a year and not a
Well,
month.
okay, we've all seen that happen. Let's think of it. What's your name? Nadav? Let's think of this in terms of like one conversation, then we'll expand it to a longer conversation. Let's say you've got an hour meeting with somebody, and I'll go to where you're saying in a minute, okay? Let's say it's an hour meeting. Don't bring everything out too quickly. It's like it will overwhelm the person. Be patient. Patience is one of the most important factors in ditching the pitch. You have to be willing to wait for the right time to bring something in. So maybe if you determine something in the first few minutes of a customer conversation, wait. Maybe in 10 minutes it'll be the right time to bring it in. When your customer says something that's appropriate, or if they've assimilated more information. Because remember, if you tell your customer everything that's on your mind, how much of it will they remember? They won't remember it all. It's very easy to overwhelm someone. You think about your business every day. Your customer doesn't think about your business every day. They can't bring in that information. They can't assimilate that information as fast as you can. Now, Nadav's point is, what about if they're taking too long? And I have that problem all the time when I'm consulting to companies. I see that they don't realize the house is on fire and they're going to go study it for a while. No, you need to fix your business now, right? So what you need to do is through conversation, when you're exploring and heightening, you're finding out what they really care about and talk about those things. Now, there are going to be stupid customers, right? We've all had stupid customers who don't do the right thing for their business. As I mentioned before, maybe not everybody should be your customer. I've had lots of companies who have big troubles in their business and they can't see it, and I decide I'm going to move on and spend my time elsewhere. But it is a challenge. And if you need to bring your customer to a decision earlier, these techniques will help do that for those customers where it's possible. Okay, Iskal?
It's also really frightening. So for instance, if there's 50 things to fix, you can't, once he or she will hear this, they'll say, well, you know what, maybe we've gone too fast into consultant. You need to start with the top 3 stuff, and then from there trickle to...
It's a very important point. I know that as a consultant, it's very easy to overwhelm someone with too many solutions too quickly. Here's what you need to think about. You have many conversations with your customers. I mean, you're all in different businesses, okay? But you don't close a sale in every customer conversation. Closing the sale is only the goal in a small fraction of your customer conversations. But in every customer conversation, your goal is to advance your relationship. So what's important to do is to always recognize, okay, what is it I'm trying to get out of this conversation? Like Jordana said, if the person's in a hurry, right, then maybe I decide I'm not going to close the sale today, but I'm at least going to have a good conversation, so maybe they'll make time for me next week. If, as Gal said, there's so much information, don't give it to them all at once. Have them start to assimilate it, and then plan a phone call for tomorrow. It's very important to recognize that your goal is not to tell your customer everything. It's to advance your relationship so that you will be able to earn the business or get them to say yes or persuade them to do what you want them to do at the right point in time. This brings us to the next practice on the bottom of page 11, which is called leave things in your pocket. Anyone want to guess what this means, to leave things in your pocket?
Don't say everything.
Don't say everything, right? You know, the example is there's a car salesman. And this car salesman, he just thinks the engine in this new car is so amazing. It's got 250 horsepower, and it's a V8, and it's got this overhead whatever, right? And he thinks it's the greatest thing. And this couple walks in to look at the car, and they're going, oh, the cup holders are great to put my coffee in, right? Don't talk about the engine, right? You can imagine the sales, but let me tell you about the engine, right? Ira and I saw, we happened to have a chance to see an investor pitch the other day. And it was getting to be the end of the guy's time, and somebody asked a question, and he basically said, I'm not done, I'll get to that later, but I want to finish my presentation, and went on to the next piece of his presentation, which was not critical to what we all wanted to hear. Leave things in your pocket, metaphorically. You've got lots of pieces of your story. Don't pull them all out. Be willing to leave things to the side so you don't overwhelm your customer. Don't rush the story. Anybody want to give me an example of when they've been in a customer conversation and really wanted to say something and you either said it or you restrained yourself and didn't? Chris, did you ever have it?
No, I apologize.
It's okay. It's a good thing this wasn't an art auction. You just bought the $1 million painting. Sold to the man in the blue. Anybody have an example of like leaving things in your pocket, something you really wanted to say to a customer and you either didn't or you did say it and regretted it?
Sure. We can, with a good price in our pocket, and then we find the price the company is willing to pay 30% more.
I'm glad you left that in your pocket.
Thanks, Shlomo, we didn't say anything.
Awesome, Shlomo. You got 30% more. Good. That's a great example, right? If you said it too soon, you might, right. I mentioned earlier, you always want to leave price till later, because when you ditch the pitch and you have a conversation about your customer that your customer cares about, your value goes up. When you are able to craft your story in terms of what they need, not in terms of what you're trying to sell, your value goes up. When they understand you better and they understand how you fit into their needs, your value goes up. It's always better to wait on price for sure.
Well, then you don't have to close the sale. They'll close it for you.
They'll close it for you, which is a great.
They'll ask you what's next.
They'll ask
where do we go from here.
That's a great point. I was saying they'll ask you. They'll buy as opposed to being sold, right? Okay, excellent. So we have now reviewed 6 habits. Let's, if we can, turn to page 12 if we can. And what I'm going to ask you to do is spend about 5 minutes and look through the 6 habits we've gone through. I'm sure some of the habits I presented, you said, I'm good at that one. I'm really good at input before output. I listen very well. Or maybe you said another habit, I'm not as good at that one. What I would like you to do is to rank yourself. Write number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1 is the habit that you are already the best at. 2 is the habit you are second best at. All the way down to 6. 6 is the habit where you need the most work, okay? So take a couple minutes and do that. Okay, how are we doing? How are we doing? Everybody got their 1 through 6? Okay, here's what I like to do is I'm going to, number 1 and your number 6 habit. Okay, so the first habit is called think input before output. How many of you put habit number 1 as your best habit? So 4, 6 people. Okay. The second habit is size up the scene. How many of you put size up the scene as your best habit? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Create a series of yeses. How many of you put create a series of yeses as your best habit? 1, 2, 3. Okay. We had explore and heighten. How many of you put explore and heighten as your best habit? 1, 2, 3, 4. I should have written these before I did them because I'm writing them very sloppy. Can you read what I'm writing? Okay, and the fifth habit, which is called focus the conversation on your customer. How many of you put focus the conversation on your customer as your best habit? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? And then the last one was don't rush the story. How many of you put don't rush the story as your best habit? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? Now let's go to the habit where we need the most work. The habit that needs the most practice. Who put think input before output as their number 6 habit? 1, 2, 3. Okay? How many put size of the scene as their number 6 habit? Nobody? Okay? What about create a series of yeses as your number 6 habit? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, explore and heighten is your number 6 habit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, focus the conversation on your customer is your number 6 habit. 1, 2, 3. Anybody else? Okay, and don't rush the story. Ooh, lots of them on that one, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, great. So let's look at this. What's interesting about this is it proves that we're all different, right? And I'm sure even with your number 6, you're pretty good at this. This is not remedial. You are not starting at the beginning. You already have talents here. We're talking about making them better. What do you see here? Any patterns anybody sees? It's interesting. I think that most of us, the highest number of people on number 6 say they need to work on not rushing the story. Gal, did you want to say something?
I'm just curious because if I'm rushing the story, that means I'm not putting the customer all the time. I'm not focusing the conversation on the customer. Even though I might on a certain plane, but if I'm rushing towards my goal, does it make sense?
Totally. Totally.
That's it.
It when you're rushing towards your goal, you're getting there, not doing it in a way he might be right for him.
You're being sloppy. You can do a better job.
Ira?
I don't know, based on the numbers anyway, I know everybody's different, but I think a lot of people size up the scene and jump to a conclusion, and that's why you're not finishing the story. You're making assumptions way too early without really following through the process. You're jumping.
And let's talk about, I mentioned 2 times, thanks for bringing that up, Ira, because I mentioned 2 times where jumping to conclusions too quickly can get you in trouble. One thing is, you might say something, the customer goes, well, no, that's not it. Remember, a conversation is a series of yeses, and it's not only about you saying yes, it's about making sure your customer says yes. I mean, I've had that happen to me before, where I'll figure out what it is, I'll say, so this is what's going on. It's like, no, that's not right. Now the conversation has stalled. But the other reason you need to not say things, jump to conclusions too quickly, is that your customer might not be ready to hear these things. We talked about don't rush the story. You will always have ideas for your customer before your customer is ready for them because you know your stuff. Any other observations? Yes, Ariel?
I think we're used to thinking about our pitch as two parts. Sizing up the scenes, what most of us we do, but then we look for a hook to push in our own story, and then it's over. And we're not thinking of it as, maybe we're thinking of it as sex, but not as making love.
Well, it's like we look for an opportunity to tell our story and we just go for it, right? We just, to put it in maybe slightly more delicate terms, we get transactional about it. We just, let me tell you what I can sell you, right? Yeah, it was interesting. I was doing some role playing with a young guy I know in Chicago who created a health and wellness program for stressed out executives, and he was targeting lawyers, because lawyers, anybody a lawyer here? It's a tough job. You are?
Yeah.
You are.
She's a very stressed out type, right?
Right, but I know many lawyers who don't practice law anymore, like Alyssa, because it's a very stressed out life. So I was doing role playing with this young man, where I was going to pretend to be a lawyer, and he was going to try to sell me something. So he says, "So what's going on in your life?" He says, I said, "Oh, I'm so stressed out. I have no time for anything." He goes, "Well, tell me about it." I said, "Well, my partners want this from me. I don't get home late. My wife's mad at me because I'm not taking care of the kids. My clients need things faster than I can give them." I said about that much. He said, "Great. Based on that, let me tell you what we can do. We've got an 8-week program. And first week you're going to do this. And then you're going to do this." And he talked for like 3 minutes. After hearing me talk for a second, I was like, whoa, come on, it's too much, too quick, right? He jumped to a conclusion about what I wanted. It might not have been right, but also it was too much, too fast. So let's do this. We are right on time, right on schedule. Let me just see if we have any questions, and then maybe Yossi and I can close it up a little with a few more comments from Yossi, and if there's time, a little more jamming. Any questions or comments on Ditch the Pitch? Any more ideas? Haran?
I think you need to figure out what your strength is, and get into a relationship with the customer, and upon that, try to see which types of videos to try and penetrate through. And
what's the right way to that customer to penetrate through to them?
Yeah, but what's your strength?
And
bring those up. Not necessarily go think what are my weaknesses.
Yes.
And make those up.
This is an interesting point. Let's talk about what Haran's saying. Haran, I think what you're saying is if you're really good at exploring and heightening, use that in customer conversations, right? I mean, it's a very good life practice to focus on what you're good at and get better at them, right? So I think that's a really good point, is if you're a really good listener, really develop your listening skills to an even higher level. At the same time, yes, and, that I believe that everybody in this room, even though you are better at certain habits than others, you can do them all. What did you put as number 6, Haran?
Creating a series of yeses.
I've had conversations with you before. You're good at conversations. You're good at yeses, right? In other words, even the ones that are number 6, we're still pretty good at. You guys wouldn't be here tonight if you weren't good at just having conversations with other human beings. I'm sure if I watched you with your friends socializing, you'd be ditching the pitch and doing all these things. But here's the good news. You have the perfect opportunity, the perfect laboratory to experiment with ditching the pitch. You know what it is? Every time you're in a conversation, your business life, but also your personal life, try this. Practice this with friends. Practice this with customers. Say, I'm going to work on, to Haran's point, you're good at exploring and heightening, do it, but maybe, you can get better at not rushing the story. Practice it. We talked earlier about habits. Our Tal you mentioned earlier, sorry, I couldn't read it from here. You mentioned that a habit is something you do regularly, over and over, right? How do we develop good habits in our life? We practice them. And so that's why in Ditch the Pitch, I give you 3 practices for every habit. And since the books are in Brazil, I've got a few of them, I want to guide you to, on my website, yastrow.com, if you go on the Ditch the Pitch area, you'll see a link for 24 videos, 90-second videos on all the habits and 3 practices per habit. Plus, there are many articles on my website that talk about the Ditch the Pitch habits. I mentioned the E-Jewish Philanthropy series, which is about fundraising. But if you're not in a not-for-profit, it'd be very easy if you could take that story and change it. There's also a press page on the website with lots of interviews I've given. So you have lots of free resources on my website to learn more about these practices and these habits. The point is this. If you practice these habits in every customer conversation you have, I will guarantee you, you will be better at persuading people, and you will get better every day, a little bit better. Yes?
I was wondering if you could focus a bit more. What about if, I don't rush the story and then, the time for the conversation is over because the customer needs to leave or needs to, continue to another appointment, and I didn't get actually, to selling my product or
it's a very good point. Let's talk about it a couple places. You need to get an understanding of how much time your customer has, like you mentioned that. When I say don't rush the story, I am not talking about having a beautiful conversation that goes on forever. You still need to get your customer to say yes. You still need to close the sale, right? But you need to do it at a pace that your customer is ready for. And by exploring and heightening, by focusing the conversation on your customer, you will get them to that point sooner than if you're giving a sales pitch. So I am not talking about waiting forever. I'm talking about having the patience to find the right time. And the right time will come. And especially if you're doing something like exploring and heightening and focusing the conversation on the customer, they will reveal to you what's important to them. They will be more deeply involved in the conversation. And at that point, you'll know when it's time to close the sale. I mentioned this idea of practicing these habits on an everyday basis in every customer conversation. On page 13, I have a picture of a dimmer switch. I don't know if they have these kind of dimmer switches in Israel, but this is a US dimmer switch. Do you have these kind here?
Yes.
Okay, good. So why do you think I put a picture of a dimmer switch here instead of a regular light switch?
Because customer relations are not a yes deal, no deal relationship.
Customer relationships grow a little bit at a time, yes. And your talents grow a little bit at a time. Think of it as, maybe you think I'm about a third as good as I could be to ditching the pitch now. So the light is turned up a third of the way. Tomorrow, if you practice these habits in 5 customer conversations, you'll be able to turn the light up a little bit. In other words, it's not like one day you cannot ditch the pitch and the next day you can. You can already do this, but you can all be better. And so you can turn the light up a little bit at a time like a dimmer switch. I find that very encouraging. It says that every day I can be better than I was yesterday. The way it works, if you get twice as good every week, if you get 1% better every week, you'll be twice as good in 72 weeks. If you get 1% better every day, you'll be twice as good in 72 days. It's like compounding, just like money compounds. If you get 1% better at ditching the pitch in every customer conversation, you'll be twice as good in 72 customer conversations. If each time you get 1% better, think about that. Can you get 1% better in every customer conversation? Of course you can. To me, I find that very encouraging. And I know it took me 3 years to write this book, and I interviewed lots of people, not only actors and musicians like Yossi, but great salespeople. And I found that using these techniques made me a lot better. I know this works, and I really encourage you to use those tools. Any other questions? Yes?
They can practice it as soon as we break.
Yeah, great, at the bar tonight, right? Whoever's coming. Any other questions?
I found that all these habits provide me with more opportunities to be authentic and know when to just quit. If a dialogue turns out really bad and I see that the conversation isn't going anywhere, I know that at least by cutting the conversation short, I'll let the other person know that I value his time.
Great point. And I love the word authentic that you used. Sales pitches are not authentic. It's not natural for human beings to come in and, right? When you ditch the pitch, you're being much more of a real, authentic person. It's a great word. Thank you for using it. I like that a lot.
What about media relationships?
What?
What about media relationships?
Media relationships?
Like mails and phones. Does it work the same or?
Oh, it's an interesting point because a lot of our conversations are now by phone or email or even text with your customers, right? What I encourage you to do is when the conversation is electronic, whether it's on the phone, here's face-to-face, phone, email, text, right? It's everything is one more step removed. Don't forget the ditch the pitch habits. In other words, let's say you were in an email dialogue with a person. Make sure you're thinking input before output. what are they really saying? It's harder to tell in email than face-to-face or on the phone. Make sure you actually create a dialogue, create a series of yeses. Make sure, haven't you gotten emails from people where they don't really answer your question? Make sure you're answering their question. Focus the conversation on the customer. In other words, it's harder to do in an electronic communication, but the same principles apply.
But you have more time to prepare, so it's in between emails, so you can do a better job sometimes.
Yeah, because you can think about it. I mentioned thinking input before output is about listening and observing. On the phone, you can't observe, so you really got to listen. Yes.
There might be a huge difference between speaking to a single person and speaking with a group that might be turned on by different things. So how do I get them in a conversation? How do I engage and heighten when I don't know what
each member of the group
bring
wants?
them all in together.
This is a really important point. Is oftentimes we are persuading more than one person at a time. If you get a chance to read Ditch the Pitch, I talk about how to sell in a situation where there's maybe you and your colleagues and more people on the other side. Again, the same principles apply. It's just a little bit harder. If I've got a meeting with 3 people, I got to try to figure out what each of those different people care about. And maybe the boss is doing all the talking and his people aren't talking, so I don't have a chance to get inputs from those other people, but they may be highly influential in the decision. It's just a little bit harder. So by the way, what I will offer you, since the books didn't arrive here, not that you would want to buy it, but if you wanted to, I didn't have it. If you decide you'd like it, they will get here and we'll cover the shipping to get it to you. Also, it's available on Amazon, as I mentioned. There's also lots of free resources available on my website if you'd like to get it. And I give you also my Twitter handle here if you'd like to connect there. And if you'd like to get in touch, I think my email address is on the front of the book. Feel free to get in touch. So any other questions? I'd like to let Yossi say a few words to close it out since you added so much here. And maybe, if do you guys have energy to hear a little more music from Yossi? Yeah.
So first of all, thank you for inviting me.
That's wonderful.
To this, I'm very honored, and it's great because I would go anyway to listen to Steve. So, I got a free ticket. And I just want to talk about for a second just the practice element to practice, because I studied life coaching about 4 years ago and communication skills, and the whole world opened up to me, because up until that point I was always seeing everything to music. People will ask me, so what have you been up to lately? And I've been, I did this record, I did this thing, I'm gonna go out and do this, and I'm gonna be on tour. That was always what was on my mind. And when I started life coaching, all of a sudden I could talk about other people and ask them, so what are you interested in, and what do you want to do, where you want to see? The main thing is that I started practicing it every minute, anywhere. So I would go to a restaurant, and there's the guards outside, making sure you don't have any bumps before you go to the restaurant. And sometimes I would have to wait until they make the food, because I just want to take it out. And then there's the guard there that nobody ever talks to. He just stands there. And I was like, okay, I got 10 minutes to kill. And all of a sudden his cell phone started, and it was some music. So I what is that music? It's Ethiopian music. He was from Ethiopia. It's like, so you're here from how long? You like that music? Yeah, I love that music. How long you been here? 7 years. And you like it here? In 10 minutes, I knew so much about what goes on in Ethiopian man's mind. Not just him. He explained to me what happens to them when they come from their culture to here, and all the culture shock that goes with it. And that was amazing for me, So the next day I came there, I was very welcomed by him every day. The owner of the restaurant, I always saw him as a very, very tough guy. I always see him there. He's very tough, always yells at the people that work for him, and always very, he's got a lot of chains and rings and stuff like that. And I was always intimidated by him. And I decided, okay, I got another 10 minutes to kill, I'll talk to him. And how he started was, I noticed how thoughtful it was that you put all your meats in the front window. Not a lot of people do that. What made you think about that? It was like, oh, I didn't think about that. It was like some designer thought about that. And I was like, okay. So I see that you're here every day. Do you like being here every day? You know what? I hate being here every day. What I would really love to do, and then something else started. So the main thing for me was to practice. I just wanted to practice in this communication skill. So that's my point to you right now, is that with all those habits, you don't have to do all those habits at once. Just pick one. Just pick one and repeat that few times with just about anybody. And the more they are not from your world, the better. Because you don't have anything to lose. And so repeat one thing, and then repeat another one. And after a while, you're going to get really strong in all of them. If you'll try to take all the 6 habits at once, that's going to be hard. But if you'll do it one at a time, repeatedly, until you get good, then it's like that's the way we do in music. We just practice one thing at a time until we get good with this, and then we move on to the next thing, and then we move on to the next thing. When I want to rehearse a song with a group of musicians, and the song has a beginning, middle, chorus, and again another part, and I never do it all at once. I go, let's just go over one part, just the chorus. Let's just sing the chorus, let's just play the chorus over and over and over again until we get it good. And then, and then we do the next part, the verse, until we get it good. And then we combine all the things together. So that's the main thing here.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, because I mentioned how every customer conversation is an opportunity to practice. If a customer tells you something that they're very interested in, great chance to practice exploring and heightening. If a customer, I remember I talked about the practice, say less to notice more. If a customer has a lot to say, practice that. And by practicing them one at a time, eventually it all comes together. Just like the song eventually all came together. I love that technique. My band needs to try that. We try to do the whole song at once too much. Thanks.
Yeah, that's always a little bit at a time.
That's wonderful, wonderful advice. Thank you. That's good. Well, thank you, Yossi. That's great advice. Should we play something to take us out here? Improvise something?
Because you come from Chicago, blues.
Oh, blues? Okay. Okay, sounds good. You want me to start it?
Yeah, happy blues.
Oh, happy blues. Okay. Okay, so. So I guess you're all going to join us, hopefully, those that can. Alyssa, will you tell us again where we're going?
Sure. I'm actually going to pass that one over. But firstly, thank you both so much. It was such a treat to have Yossi here. And Steve, it's always great to have you back in our home.
Thanks,
so
Alyssa.
Really welcome. And next time you're in town, let us know. And we're all going out for drinks now. So please, Yossi, come and join us, and Steve and the whole crew over here as well in the corner.